Bulelani Mapai was a man of little note in the village of Tholini, Eastern Cape, South Africa. His face was one among many, blending into the daily rhythms of rural life. To the people around him he was quiet and ordinary, a drifter who sometimes helped with odd jobs but mostly kept to himself. Nobody knew that beneath his unassuming exterior lay a predator whose capacity for cruelty would carve his name into South Africa's darkest criminal annals. Mapai had lived a life of hardship. Born into poverty, his formative years were marked by instability and neglect. Though many in his community shared similar struggles, Mapai's response to his circumstances was unlike any other. Just where others sought to survive, he began to feed an insidious darkness growing within him, a darkness that would turn him into one of South Africa's most prolific serial killers. By the time the villagers of Tholini realized what had been happening in their midst, it was too late. The bodies of women and children littered his path, their deaths a testament to his calculated and ruthless nature. Over the course of several years, Bulelani Mapai claimed the lives of at least 20 people, leaving behind a trail of grief and terror. The first known killing occurred in 2007, though investigators would later speculate that Mapai's crimes may have started even earlier. His modus operandi was chillingly methodical. He stalked his victims carefully, observing their routines and choosing his targets with precision. Mapai preyed on the most vulnerable, women and children who lived in isolated homes. He would break into these homes under the cover of night, his approach so silent that even the dogs failed to sound an alarm. Once inside, he unleashed unspeakable violence. He raped and then murdered his victims, often leaving the scene so gruesome that even seasoned investigators were left shaken. In one instance, a woman and her 3 young children were found dead in their small home. The brutality of the scene was almost incomprehensible. The woman had been strangled, and her children were beaten to death with blunt objects. The forensic evidence suggested that the killings had been carried out with cold precision. These weren't crimes of impulse. They were the work of a predator who reveled in his dominance over the weak. Yet for years, Mapai evaded capture, his quiet demeanor allowing him to walk freely among the very people he terrorized. Tholini was not a place accustomed to such horrors. Before Mapai began his killing spree, it had been a peaceful village, its residents bound together by shared struggles and communal traditions. Life was simple, revolving around farming, family, and faith. But as the killings continued, the village changed. Fear seeped into every corner of life. People stopped venturing out after dark. Families began sleeping together in one room, their doors and windows barricaded with furniture. Traditional healers were consulted, and rituals were performed to ward off the evil that seemed to stalk their. Despite these measures, the killings continued unabated. Mapai's ability to strike without being seen or heard only deepened the villagers' sense of helplessness. Whispers of a supernatural curse began to circulate. How else could one explain the killer's ability to evade capture for so long? What made Bulelani Mapai so dangerous was his invisibility. He wasn't a stranger to Tholini. He was part of the community, albeit on its fringes. He lived a solitary life, drifting between odd jobs and keeping to himself. This low profile shielded him from suspicion, even as the body count rose. Mapai's crimes were committed with such chilling precision that investigators initially believed they were dealing with multiple killers. The randomness of his attacks, combined with the lack of witnesses or physical evidence, left the police grasping at straws. Meanwhile, Mapai moved through the village like a ghost, his quiet demeanor masking the darkness within. He attended community events, greeted neighbors, and even expressed sympathy for the victims' families. It was this ability to blend in that allowed him to evade suspicion for so long. The breakthrough in the case came in August 2012, when Mapai made a mistake. He attacked a young woman, assuming she would be another silent victim. But this time, his victim survived. Despite the trauma of the attack, she managed to provide police with a description of her assailant. This crucial lead led investigators to Mapai. When he was arrested, the villagers were stunned. How could this quiet, unremarkable man be the monster who had haunted their nights for years? But as the evidence mounted, the truth became undeniable. Under questioning, Mabhai confessed to his crimes with a chilling lack of remorse. He recounted his murders in graphic detail, describing how he had selected, stalked, and killed his victims. His confessions revealed a mind consumed by darkness, driven by a twisted need for power and control. Bulelani Mabhai's trial became one of the most notorious in South African history. Dubbed the Monster of Tholini by the media, he faced 20 counts of murder, 6 counts of rape, and multiple charges of burglary. The courtroom was packed with villagers eager to see justice served. Survivors, family members of the victims, and community leaders came to bear witness, their faces etched with grief and anger. Throughout the trial, Mabhai remained unnervingly calm. He showed no remorse as the prosecution laid out the gruesome details of his crimes. Forensic evidence, survivor testimonies, and Mabhai's own confessions painted a damning picture. In September 2013, Mabhai was convicted and sentenced to 25 life terms without the possibility of parole. The judge described him as a cold-blooded killer who had preyed on the most vulnerable members of society. The conviction of Bulelani Mabhai brought a measure of relief to Tholini, but the scars of his crimes remain. The families of his victims continue to grapple with their loss, their lives forever altered by his acts of violence. For the village as a whole, the ordeal has left a lingering sense of vulnerability. Tholini is no longer the peaceful community it once was. The fear that gripped the village during Mabhai's reign of terror has given way to a somber resilience, but the memories of those dark years are never far from the surface. Bulelani Mabhai's crimes have also sparked broader discussions about the systemic issues that allowed him to operate for so long. His ability to evade capture highlighted the lack of resources available to rural police stations, as well as the vulnerabilities faced by women and children in impoverished communities. In the years since his conviction, there have been calls for greater investment in rural policing and social services. Community leaders hope that these changes will help prevent another predator like Mabhai from emerging. The story of Bulelani Mabhai forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil. How does someone like Mabhai exist in a community without raising suspicion? What drives a person to commit such unspeakable acts? For the people of Tholini, these questions may never have satisfying answers, but they serve as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most ordinary facades. Mabhai may now be behind bars, but the shadow he cast over Tholini will never fully disappear. His story is a chilling testament to the fragility of peace and the resilience of those who endure even the darkest of times. Even with Bulelani Mabhai behind bars, the weight of his crimes still hangs heavily over Tholini. Each family affected by his violence carries the trauma like an open wound, unable to fully heal. The villagers often recount the events to visitors and journalists who venture into the area, as if retelling the horrors helps them process the unthinkable. The small community that once thrived on trust and unity now exists under an invisible cloud of suspicion and fear. The question lingers, could another like Mabhai emerge unnoticed? Parents caution their children not to speak to strangers even within their own village. Neighbors who once left their doors open to one another now lock them tightly, a small but necessary price for peace of mind. Traditional healers in Tholini have also become pivotal in helping the community cope. Many families have turned to these spiritual leaders for cleansing rituals, believing that the lingering presence of Mabhai's atrocities must be purged to restore balance. For some, these rituals offer solace, while others find comfort in the simple routines of life returning to normal. Psychologists and criminologists have studied Mabhai's case extensively, seeking to understand what drove him to commit such heinous acts. His history of neglect, isolation, and poverty likely played a role, creating the conditions for a deeply fractured psyche. What stands out about Mabhai, however, is his sheer lack of remorse. In his confessions, he spoke about his crimes as though recounting ordinary events, devoid of any emotional connection to his victims. Experts have described this detachment as a hallmark of psychopathy, a condition characterized by a lack of empathy, remorse, and an inflated sense of self. But understanding his psychological makeup offers little comfort to those he harmed. For the people of Tholini, Such insights do nothing to erase the devastation he caused. Still, these studies are crucial for law enforcement and mental health professionals who hope to recognize the signs of similar behavior in others before tragedy strikes again. Mabai's case has sparked widespread discussion across South Africa about the systemic issues that allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. The murders highlighted glaring inadequacies in rural policing, where limited resources and understaffing often leave communities vulnerable. In Tholani, police were frequently overwhelmed by the lack of forensic tools, delays in processing evidence, and the sheer geographic challenges of patrolling vast rural areas. These shortcomings were compounded by the isolation of victims, many of whom lived in homes far removed from the main village. Women's rights organizations have also used Mabai's case to draw attention to the epidemic of gender-based violence in South Africa. Activists point to the fact that Mabai's victims were predominantly women and children, a pattern that mirrors broader societal trends. Their calls for systemic change have led to increased funding for rural safety initiatives, though progress remains slow and uneven. While the tragedy of Bulelani Mabai's crimes cannot be undone, his case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance, community support, and justice. In Tholani, residents have organized community watch groups, ensuring that no home is left vulnerable. These initiatives have not only improved security, but also begun to rebuild the trust that Mabai's actions so thoroughly shattered. On a national level, Mabai's case has led to calls for better education about the warning signs of predatory behavior. Workshops and campaigns now teach communities how to recognize and report suspicious activities, with the hope of preventing future tragedies. Bulelani Mabai's name will forever be etched into the history of Tholani and South Africa. His crimes were not just acts of individual cruelty, but a stark reflection of the systemic failures that allowed him to thrive in the shadows. For those who lived through his reign of terror, the memory of his atrocities serves as a constant reminder of the fragility of safety. Yet, amidst the sorrow, there is also resilience. The people of Tholani have begun to reclaim their lives, their village, and their sense of community. And while the shadow of the monster of Tholani may never fully fade, the light of those who endure will always shine brighter.